Olivia Carter stood in the middle of a crowded art gallery in downtown Manhattan, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her camera. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter, but Olivia's focus was on the photos hanging on the walls, her photos. For months, she had poured her soul into capturing the raw, unfiltered life of New York streets. From late-night subway riders to weathered street vendors, each image told a story of survival, resilience, and humanity. She glanced around the room, seeing strangers pausing in front of her work, examining the details. A flutter of anxiety filled her stomach. This was her first big exhibition, a crucial step in the cutthroat art scene of New York. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, all she could think about was whether she was good enough. The looming pressure of success in this city could break even the toughest artists, and Olivia was still trying to prove to herself she had what it took. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the corner of her vision. A tall, older man with graying hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. He moved gracefully through the room, his expensive suit and quiet confidence marking him as someone important. As he approached one of her photos, Olivia felt her breath catch. She knew who he was, Nicholas Montgomery, the eccentric billionaire and notorious art collector. His reputation preceded him. He was a man who could make or break an artist's career with a single purchase or harsh critique. Olivia had never expected someone like him to attend her small exhibition. Yet, here he was, standing in front of her photograph of a homeless man curled up on the steps of a church. "Brilliant," Nicholas murmured, his voice smooth and deliberate. He turned toward her, locking eyes. "You have a gift for capturing the soul of the city, Miss Carter." Olivia felt her heart race. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone of his stature. She cleared her throat, trying to sound composed. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that from someone like you." Nicholas gave a small, knowing smile. "I don't say it lightly. Your work, it's raw, real. There's no pretense, no artificial gloss. Just life, in its most honest form." For a moment, Olivia stood frozen, absorbing his words. Then, he extended his hand. "Nicholas Montgomery," he said with an air of familiarity, though they both knew she already recognized him. "Olivia Carter," she replied, shaking his hand, trying to keep her nerves in check. "I'll be honest," Nicholas began, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on her. "I came here tonight expecting to find another series of generic, over-stylized urban shots. But your work, it's different. There's something deeply personal about it." Olivia wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply nodded, trying to suppress the overwhelming urge to blurt out all her insecurities. This was it, the moment every aspiring artist dreamed of, being noticed by someone who could change everything. Before she could think of what to say next, Nicholas glanced at his watch. "I have to leave shortly, but before I go, I wanted to mention something. More of a warning, really." "A warning?" Olivia's stomach tightened. "I'm about to close a major deal with Jacob Reed. You've heard of him, I assume?" Nicholas's voice was casual, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her reaction. Olivia's breath hitched at the mention of that name. Jacob Reed. The name sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't heard it in years, and she had hoped never to hear it again. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her camera as memories she'd buried began to resurface. Nicholas noticed her change in demeanor. "You know him," he stated rather than asked, his eyes now fully focused on her. Olivia swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. I do. We've crossed paths before." Nicholas raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her sudden tension. "I see. Well, I'm meeting with him tomorrow to finalize some business. He's known to be cunning, but I can handle him." Olivia hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to shout out a warning, to tell him to run as far away from Jacob Reed as possible. But something held her back. Instead, she spoke carefully. "Nicholas, be careful with him. Jacob, he's not who he appears to be. Trust me on that." Nicholas frowned, clearly intrigued by her cryptic warning. "Is there something I should know, Miss Carter?" Olivia shook her head, her heart pounding. "Just be cautious. That's all I can say." Nicholas regarded her silently for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. Finally, he nodded. Noted. Thank you for the advice, Olivia. He turned to leave but paused at the gallery door. I'll be in touch. I'd like to discuss your future. With that, he was gone, leaving Olivia standing alone in the gallery, her mind swirling with old wounds and new fears. The gallery was quieter now, the once crowded space slowly emptying as the night wore on. Olivia stood in the dim light, her mind a whirl of emotions after her brief, unsettling conversation with Nicholas Montgomery. Her heart pounded in her chest, the mention of Jacob Reed having triggered memories she had worked so hard to suppress. She packed up her camera equipment methodically, each click of the lens cap and zip of her bag acting as a distraction from the thoughts gnawing at her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the flood of memories. Jacob Reed. His name was like a shadow, creeping back into her life just when she thought she had finally moved past him. It had been years since they had last spoken, and Olivia had done everything in her power to forget their shared past. But it seemed the city and fate had other plans. As she locked the door to the gallery behind her and stepped onto the chilly streets of Manhattan, her thoughts returned to her first encounter with Jacob. She had been so young then, full of hope and ambition. He had seemed like a dream come true, an established curator who had taken a genuine interest in her work when no one else would. He had promised to open doors for her, to introduce her to the right people. And for a while, he had delivered on those promises. Her career had started to blossom under his mentorship, and for a brief moment, Olivia had believed in him, believed in their partnership. But then, everything had fallen apart. Jacob had betrayed her in the worst way possible. He had taken her trust, her work, and twisted them for his own gain. Olivia still remembered the feeling of helplessness when she discovered that he had been stealing her photographs, passing them off as part of a collective he was curating, without her consent. The exhibit had been a hit, but she was cut out completely. Worse, he'd used her work as a stepping stone to elevate his own career while tarnishing hers in the process. That was when Olivia had learned the hard truth. Jacob Reed was a master of manipulation. He was charming, polished, and ruthless in his pursuit of success. He had no qualms about destroying anyone who stood in his way, and Olivia had been one of his many victims. Her stomach churned as she recalled the sleepless nights spent trying to rebuild her reputation, the anger and humiliation she had swallowed down just to survive in this brutal world. She had nearly given up on photography altogether, convinced that the art world was nothing more than a game rigged for people like Jacob. But something inside her had refused to quit. Slowly, she had clawed her way back, finding her voice again through her street photography, capturing the stories of those often overlooked, just as she had felt after Jacob discarded her. Now, years later, Jacob's name was back in her life. And not just in passing, Nicholas Montgomery, one of the most influential figures in the art world, was about to strike a deal with him. Olivia quickened her pace, weaving through the bustling late-night crowd. She had to warn Nicholas. She didn't know him well, but the thought of anyone else falling into Jacob's trap made her feel sick. Jacob had a way of wrapping people around his finger, using his charm and expertise to draw them in before exploiting them for his own benefit. Her apartment wasn't far from the gallery, a modest studio in the East Village, but the walk felt longer tonight. She could barely concentrate on the neon signs and honking taxis that usually marked the rhythm of the city she loved. All she could think about was Nicholas and the danger he was walking into. When she finally reached her building, she took the stairs 2 at a time, her urgency pressing against her chest. Inside, she tossed her bag onto the couch and sank into a chair by the window, staring out over the street below. The light from the street lamp outside cast long shadows across the room. What was she supposed to do now? She had tried to warn Nicholas, but her words had been too vague. He had seemed interested, yes, but not convinced. She couldn't exactly blame him. After all, she hadn't given him any real details. But could she really trust him with the full story? Telling him everything about Jacob would mean exposing her own painful past, something she wasn't ready to do with a man she barely knew. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Nicholas's number, saved from an earlier email exchange they had about the gallery. Her thumb hovered over the call button, hesitation creeping in. What would she even say? She had already warned him. Would calling again make her seem paranoid, desperate? As her mind raced with indecision, a sudden knock on the door startled her. Olivia's head snapped up, her heart skipping a beat. It was late, too late for visitors. She hesitated for a moment, then stood, cautiously moving toward the door. She peered through the peephole and immediately stepped back in surprise. It was Nicholas Montgomery. For a moment, she didn't move, shocked by his sudden appearance at her door. What was he doing here? And at this hour? Gathering herself, Olivia opened the door slowly. Nicholas stood there, his expression unreadable. He was still impeccably dressed, though his tie was now loosened, and there was a certain weariness in his eyes. "Olivia," he began, his voice low, "I need to talk to you." She stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. Nicholas walked in, his eyes scanning the small, cluttered apartment before settling back on her. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," he started, his tone more serious than it had been at the gallery. "About Jacob." Olivia crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "And?" Nicholas exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You didn't say much, but it was enough to make me curious. I don't do business with people lightly, and I always research my partners. But something about your reaction. There's more to the story, isn't there?" Olivia felt a knot form in her stomach. She had wanted him to listen, to take her warning seriously, but now that he was standing in front of her, pressing for answers, the weight of it all felt heavier than she had anticipated. "There's a lot you don't know about Jacob," Olivia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I can explain in one conversation." Nicholas took a step closer, his gaze sharp. "Then explain it. I need to know what I'm walking into." For a long moment, Olivia considered his words. Part of her wanted to turn him away, to tell him that it wasn't her problem anymore, that he should figure it out on his own. But another part of her, the part that still felt the sting of Jacob's betrayal, knew she couldn't let him fall into the same trap. "Fine," she said, her voice steadying. "But if I tell you the truth, you need to promise me something." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Olivia met his gaze, her expression serious. "Promise me you'll walk away from the deal." Nicholas stared at her for a moment, clearly taken aback by the intensity of her request. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I promise." Olivia exhaled, her heart pounding as she prepared to finally reveal the truth about the man they both needed to fear. Olivia sat down on the worn couch in her small apartment, her body tense, eyes fixed on Nicholas. The sound of the city hummed through the thin walls, a constant reminder of where they were. New York, a place where secrets had a way of staying buried unless you were brave enough to dig them up. Nicholas remained standing, his tall figure casting shadows in the dim light of the single lamp. His curiosity was palpable, but Olivia could sense something more in his gaze now. A mix of wariness and anticipation. She took a deep breath, unsure of how much to tell him. Her past with Jacob Reed was not something she liked to talk about, and she had spent years trying to push the memories aside. But now, with Nicholas standing there, wanting answers, she couldn't ignore the urgency. If she didn't tell him, who knew what Jacob might do to him? Jacob had a way of drawing people into his world, of making them believe in his charm, only to crush them when they were no longer useful. "He was my mentor once," Olivia started, her voice low. "I was young, naive, and full of hope. Back then, I was still trying to break into the art world, and Jacob Reed seemed like a godsend. He was this big-name curator, respected, connected, and he noticed me. Or at least I thought he did." Nicholas didn't move, listening intently, his arms crossed as he leaned against the doorway. He didn't interrupt, which was good because Olivia needed to get this out in her own time. "He offered me everything I thought I wanted. Introductions to the right people, invitations to exclusive exhibitions, and a promise to help me build my career. And for a while, it worked. I started getting attention, thanks to him. I was in galleries I'd only dreamed of. But then, things changed." Olivia's voice faltered, and she glanced away, feeling the old anger stir within her. The betrayal had been slow, insidious. It didn't happen all at once. It had crept up on her, until one day she realized everything she thought she had gained was built on lies. "What happened?" Nicholas asked, his voice calm but probing. "He stole from me," Olivia said simply, the bitterness evident in her words. "Not just my photos, but my ideas, my vision. He presented my work as his own, under a collective he was curating, but I wasn't credited. He used me. And the worst part? I didn't see it coming. I trusted him." Nicholas's eyes narrowed slightly. "He used your work to boost his reputation?" Olivia nodded, her throat tightening. "He took full advantage of my inexperience. I was young, and I didn't know how the industry worked. I didn't know how ruthless someone like Jacob could be. By the time I figured out what was happening, it was too late. My reputation was ruined. People thought I was just a pawn in his game. They thought I couldn't stand on my own without him. And Jacob?" He walked away unscathed, as if nothing had happened. The memory of those days was still vivid. Her attempts to confront Jacob, the way he had smiled calmly, dismissing her accusations as though she were nothing more than a bitter ex-student who had misunderstood the situation. He had spun it so well, turning the narrative to suit his needs. The art world was small, and once word spread, she was finished. "I had to start over," Olivia continued, her voice softening as she looked back at Nicholas. "It took years to rebuild my career, to distance myself from the damage he caused. But even now, there are still people who associate me with him. I've fought hard to make a name for myself again, but the scars, they don't go away." Nicholas's expression hardened. He didn't need to say anything. Olivia could tell he was piecing together his own thoughts. He had asked for the truth, and now he had it. But she wasn't done yet. "That's why I told you to be careful," Olivia said, her tone more urgent now. "Jacob will smile, shake your hand, and make you believe you're partners. But once you're in his web, it's only a matter of time before he pulls the strings. He manipulates people for his own gain, and when he's done with you, he'll leave you with nothing." Nicholas let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "I appreciate your honesty, but there's something you should know, too." Olivia frowned, unsure where he was going with this. Nicholas crossed the room, sitting down on the chair across from her, his expression unreadable. "I've had my own dealings with Jacob, though not in the same way," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Years ago, I invested in a gallery, one I believed had a promising future. Jacob was part of that. He convinced me it was a sure thing, that the gallery would flourish under his leadership. He was so confident, so convincing. But he was lying." Olivia felt a cold chill run through her. This was worse than she had thought. "The gallery went under within a year," Nicholas continued, his voice tight with anger. "Jacob walked away unscathed, like always, and I was left with the financial mess. He had drained the place dry, manipulated the numbers, made it look like he was trying to save it, but in reality, he was lining his own pockets. I lost millions." There was a long pause as the weight of Nicholas's words sank in. Olivia watched him closely, seeing the bitterness in his eyes. She understood that look all too well. Jacob had a way of leaving destruction in his wake, no matter who got caught in the crossfire. "Why didn't you stop him?" Olivia asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. "Jacob was too careful, too smart. He never left enough evidence to pin anything on him. And even when people knew what he was doing, proving it was another matter entirely." Nicholas sighed, leaning back in the chair. "I tried. I confronted him, but he always had a way of slipping through. He has powerful friends, connections that go deep into the art world. People are afraid to cross him, and those who do, well, they end up like me, or like you." For a moment, the room was silent, the distant hum of the city the only sound. Olivia felt a strange sense of solidarity with Nicholas, a connection she hadn't expected. They had both been burned by the same man, both left to pick up the pieces of their careers. But there was also something else, something unspoken that hung between them. Jacob had hurt them both, but this time, it didn't feel like he would get away with it. "We can't let him keep doing this," Olivia said finally, breaking the silence. Nicholas nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a new determination. "No, we can't. But we need more than just our stories to stop him." Olivia knew he was right. Jacob was too powerful, too entrenched in the art world to be taken down by mere accusations. They needed proof, something concrete that would expose him for who he really was. And deep down, Olivia knew they would have to dig into the past to uncover the secrets Jacob had buried so well. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be without risk. But after everything Jacob had done to her, to Nicholas, to countless others, she wasn't going to walk away this time. "Where do we start?" Olivia asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on her. Nicholas's lips curved into a grim smile. "We start with what Jacob doesn't want anyone to find." And with that, Olivia knew they were about to unravel a web far darker than either of them had imagined. The room felt colder now, as though the weight of the revelations had sucked the warmth out of the air. Olivia's heart raced, but her mind was clear. She and Nicholas weren't just individuals caught in Jacob Reed's web of deceit. They were survivors of his manipulation, united by a common enemy. But how deep did the connection go? Nicholas broke the silence first, his voice calm but resolute. "Jacob's schemes always seem to leave a trail of victims behind. I wonder just how many others like us are out there." Olivia, sitting across from him, nodded slowly. She had wondered the same thing. How many careers had Jacob destroyed, and how many more would suffer before he was finally exposed? "His influence is powerful," she said quietly. "He's protected by the very people who profit from his success. But there's always something hidden. We just need to find it." Nicholas leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were sharp, thoughtful. "The problem is, Jacob knows how to cover his tracks. He's not careless. If we're going to take him down, we need to be smarter than he is." Olivia agreed, but a familiar sinking feeling crept into her chest. They had nothing to go on. No real proof, no leverage. It was one thing to share their stories, but those were just that, stories. What they needed was evidence. And they both knew Jacob wouldn't leave anything incriminating out in the open. "I still have some old emails," Olivia said, suddenly remembering the messages they had exchanged when Jacob was first mentoring her. "They're mostly work-related, but I remember some strange conversations toward the end, before everything fell apart. I never thought much of them at the time, but now, maybe there's something in there." Nicholas's eyes lit up with interest. Old emails could be a good start. Anything that shows his patterns, his manipulation. But that might not be enough on its own. Olivia frowned. "I also have some old contacts. People I met through Jacob's network. Maybe they know something, or maybe they've been burned by him too. It's a long shot, but it's worth trying." Nicholas nodded. "We need to gather as much as we can, from every angle. The more we have, the better chance we have of finding something solid." He paused for a moment, leaning back in his chair. His expression grew darker, more introspective. "There's one more thing you should know, Olivia." She tilted her head, feeling the weight in his words. "What is it?" Nicholas ran a hand through his hair, clearly debating whether to tell her. Finally, he sighed and spoke. "Before Jacob ran my gallery into the ground, there was something odd about one of the investors who backed the gallery. I never met him in person. Jacob handled all of that, but his name kept coming up in the paperwork. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the gallery started collapsing, I realized this investor was pulling the strings behind the scenes." "Who was it?" Olivia asked, her heart pounding. Nicholas looked at her gravely. "Jacob's brother, a man named Philip Reed." The name hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. Philip Reed. She hadn't heard that name in years, but the memory of him was as sharp as ever. Jacob had mentioned him a few times during their early conversations, always in vague terms. She had never met Philip, but there was something about the way Jacob spoke of him that had unsettled her. Now, it made sense. "Philip is the one who financed the gallery?" Olivia asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Nicholas nodded slowly. "He's the quiet one, the one no one talks about. But from what I've gathered, he's as much a part of Jacob's schemes as anyone else, maybe even more. He stays in the shadows, pulling strings while Jacob takes the spotlight. If we want to bring Jacob down, we might have to deal with Philip too." The revelation hung heavy between them. This wasn't just about Jacob anymore. It never had been. It was about the Reed brothers, two men who had built an empire on lies and manipulation. And now, it was clear that if they wanted to expose Jacob, they would need to find out what role Philip had played in all of this. Olivia leaned back, trying to process what she had just learned. I had no idea Jacob had a brother involved in his business. Neither did I, Nicholas admitted. But once the gallery started going under, I began to see his name pop up more frequently in the financials. Philip is careful. He never leaves a direct trail. But I know he was involved. And if we're going to expose Jacob, we need to understand Philip's part in this too. Olivia felt the tension grow. This was much bigger than she had thought. She and Nicholas were no longer just fighting to clear their names. They were up against a well-oiled machine that had likely ruined countless lives. We need to find out everything we can about Philip, Olivia said, determination hardening her voice. He's the missing piece in all of this. Nicholas's eyes darkened as he nodded in agreement. We will, but we need to be smart about it. If Philip is anything like Jacob, he won't be easy to track down. And he won't hesitate to destroy us if he feels threatened. The thought sent a chill down Olivia's spine. She had already seen how ruthless Jacob could be, but Philip was an unknown variable, a shadow lurking just beyond their reach. If they weren't careful, they could easily end up in even deeper trouble. Nicholas stood up, pacing the small room, his mind clearly racing with possibilities. I have some people I can reach out to, he said after a moment. Old contacts who might know more about Philip's role in the art world. It's a long shot, but if anyone knows about his involvement, they will. Olivia nodded, feeling the urgency of the situation rise. They were running out of time. Jacob was about to close a deal with Nicholas, and if they didn't act quickly, it could be too late to stop him. There's one more thing, Olivia said, her voice hesitant. I know someone who might be able to help us. He was close to Jacob once, closer than I was, but I don't know if he'll talk. He's been keeping his distance for years. Nicholas turned to face her, a spark of hope in his eyes. Who is he? Daniel Hart, Olivia said, the name feeling heavy on her tongue. He used to be Jacob's right-hand man. He knows more about Jacob and Philip than anyone. But after the scandal with my photos, he disappeared. I haven't heard from him since. Nicholas's brow furrowed. Do you think he's still in the city? I don't know, Olivia admitted. But if anyone can give us the answers we need, it's Daniel. He was with Jacob from the beginning. He knows the inner workings of their business, the deals, the secrets. If we can find him. She let the thought hang in the air, knowing full well how risky it was. Daniel had vanished for a reason, and pulling him back into this mess might put them all in danger. But if they wanted to stop Jacob, and now Philip, they needed every piece of the puzzle. Nicholas crossed the room and sat back down, his face serious. Then we find him. We find Daniel. We dig into Philip's involvement, and we expose Jacob for what he really is. Olivia felt a surge of adrenaline course through her. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a real chance to set things right. Not just for herself, but for everyone Jacob had wronged. But deep down, she knew the road ahead would be perilous. They were walking into dangerous territory, and Jacob and Philip wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, Olivia wasn't afraid anymore. She had lost too much to fear. This time, she was ready for whatever came next. With a final nod, Nicholas stood. Let's get to work. And with that, they both knew. The game had officially begun. The early morning light filtered through the blinds of Olivia's studio apartment, casting long, pale shadows across the floor. Olivia hadn't slept much, if at all. Her mind was racing, consumed by the gravity of what she and Nicholas were about to undertake. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, a reminder that time was running out. Somewhere in the city, Jacob Reed was moving forward with his plans, unaware that the people he had once manipulated were now preparing to strike back. Nicholas had left late the previous night, promising to follow up with his contacts and dig deeper into Philip Reed's role in their shared history. Olivia, however, had stayed awake, her fingers hovering over her laptop, sifting through old emails, trying to find any thread that could lead them to the truth. The more she searched, the more she realized just how carefully Jacob had orchestrated everything back then. He hadn't just stolen her work. He had used it to build a false empire, and his brother Philip had quietly backed the entire operation. Olivia's phone buzzed on the table, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Nicholas. "I found something. Meet me at the cafe on 10th. 9 a.m. sharp." Olivia glanced at the time. She had an hour to get ready. Pulling on her jacket and grabbing her camera bag, more out of habit than necessity, she made her way out the door and into the crisp morning air. The walk to the cafe felt surreal, like she was stepping into a new phase of her life, one where she wasn't just running from her past, but confronting it head-on. When she arrived, Nicholas was already seated in a booth at the back, sipping his coffee with a look of quiet intensity. He waved her over, his expression serious, as if what he had uncovered would change everything. "I've been digging into Philip's background," he began once Olivia sat down. "It wasn't easy. The man keeps himself well hidden. But I managed to trace some of the financial records from the gallery back to an offshore account, one that's tied to a series of shell companies Philip has been using to fund not just Jacob's ventures, but other questionable art dealings across the globe." Olivia's eyes widened. "What kind of dealings?" Nicholas leaned in, lowering his voice as if the walls had ears. "Forgery. High-level art forgery." The word hit Olivia like a slap. Art forgery? It made sense now. Jacob's sudden rise, the money flowing through his galleries, the deals that never seemed quite legitimate. But this was bigger than she had imagined. "So, Jacob's involved in this?" Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nicholas nodded grimly. "More than involved. From what I've pieced together, Jacob and Philip have been running an operation for years, taking real works of art, having them copied by expert forgers, and then selling the fakes for massive profits. The originals disappear, sometimes into private collections, sometimes no one knows where." Olivia felt her stomach turn. "And no one's caught on to this? How is that possible?" "Jacob has always been careful," Nicholas said, his jaw tight with frustration. "He deals with private collectors, people who are more interested in appearances than authenticity. And when you have a reputation like his, no one questions you. But recently, there have been whispers in the art world, questions about the legitimacy of some of the pieces that have passed through his hands." Olivia's mind raced. Everything was falling into place now. Jacob had sabotaged her career not just because she was a threat to his reputation, but because her work was tied to something much darker. She had been collateral damage in a larger scheme. "We need proof," she said, her voice firm. "If we can expose the forgeries, we can take both Jacob and Philip down." Nicholas nodded in agreement, pulling out a small folder from his bag. He handed it to her, the edges worn from handling. "I managed to get my hands on some documents. Nothing directly incriminating yet, but it shows a pattern. These are records from one of Jacob's recent exhibitions. I cross-referenced the sale of several pieces, and 2 of them matched the descriptions of works that were reported stolen years ago." Olivia flipped through the pages, her breath catching as she saw the names of the artists. She recognized them. One in particular stood out, a photographer she had once admired, who had mysteriously disappeared from the scene after a major scandal involving a forgery. Her hands shook slightly as she realized how close she had come to a similar fate. "This is huge," Olivia murmured. "But we still need something more concrete. A direct link to Jacob." Nicholas leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "There's one place we haven't looked yet. Jacob's personal storage facility." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You mean his private collection?" "Yes. Jacob has a vault where he keeps the most valuable pieces from his personal collection. Artifacts, paintings, sculptures. It's his trophy room. But if he's been hiding forgeries or stolen works, that's where they'll be." Olivia's heart raced. Breaking into Jacob's personal vault was dangerous, more dangerous than anything they had done so far. But it was also their best chance at finding the proof they needed to expose him. "Do you know where it is?" Olivia asked, already knowing the answer from the look on Nicholas's face. "I've known for years," he said with a wry smile. "Back when we were still on good terms, Jacob bragged about it once at a party. He said it was his little fortress, hidden away in a building downtown. The security is tight, but I've been inside once. If we can get in again, we can see what he's been hiding." Olivia hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just about exposing Jacob anymore. It was about stepping into a world of crime, deceit, and power that neither she nor Nicholas fully understood. If they were caught, there would be consequences. Serious ones. But then she thought of everything Jacob had taken from her. The years of struggle, the humiliation, the lost opportunities. She wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. Nicholas nodded, his face set with determination. "Good. We need to plan this carefully. It won't be easy, but if we pull it off, we can end this once and for all." The two of them sat there for a moment, the weight of their decisions sinking in. The cafe buzzed around them, but it felt like they were in a world of their own, standing on the edge of something dangerous and unknown. "We'll need help," Olivia said, her mind racing with the logistics. "We can't do this alone." Nicholas nodded. "Agreed. I'll reach out to someone I trust, someone who knows how to bypass security systems like the ones Jacob has. It won't be cheap, but it's the only way. And I'll try to find Daniel," Olivia added, her thoughts drifting to the man who had disappeared all those years ago. "He knows more about Jacob than anyone else. If we can convince him to help, it might give us the edge we need." Nicholas raised his coffee cup, a slight grin on his face. To taking down Jacob Reed, Olivia picked up her own cup, clinking it lightly against his. "To justice." As they finished their coffees and prepared to leave, Olivia felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear. They were about to dive headfirst into a dangerous world, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had a purpose. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was fighting back. The game had shifted, and this time, Olivia and Nicholas were ready to play by their own rules. The rain drummed steadily against the window of Olivia's apartment as she stood by the sink, staring out into the darkened cityscape. New York looked different under the weight of the storm. Its usual vibrancy muted, the streets slick and shimmering under the glow of streetlights. It was fitting, she thought, for what was about to happen. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. Olivia's phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and glanced at the screen. A message from Nicholas. "We're set for tomorrow. Be ready at 10 p.m. sharp. I've arranged everything." Her heart leaped into her throat. Tomorrow. She swallowed hard, trying to calm her nerves. Nicholas had been working tirelessly over the past few days, reaching out to his contacts, pulling strings to prepare for their break into Jacob Reed's private vault. Everything was coming together faster than she had expected, but time was running out. If they didn't act soon, Jacob's deal with Montgomery would close, and he would walk away with more money, more power, and more lives ruined. Olivia set her phone down and turned to the stack of papers spread across her small dining table. Documents, photos, emails she had collected over the past week. It felt like a puzzle, one she and Nicholas were trying to solve in the dark. There were still too many missing pieces. Daniel Hart, Jacob's former right-hand man, had yet to resurface. Despite Olivia's best efforts, she couldn't find him. It was as if he had disappeared off the face of the earth. The thought gnawed at her. Daniel was the key to all of this. He knew Jacob and Philip better than anyone. Without him, they were taking a huge risk, but they couldn't wait any longer. They needed to strike before Jacob had the chance to cover his tracks. The information Nicholas had uncovered, Philip's involvement in the forgery ring, was enough to expose Jacob's operation, but only if they could tie it all together. The vault was their best chance. She gathered the documents into a neat pile and tucked them into her bag, mentally preparing for the night ahead. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. She thought of all the people Jacob had stepped on, the artists whose careers had been destroyed. She thought of her own past, the years she had lost because of him. But then, her thoughts drifted to Nicholas. He had more at stake than anyone. The loss of his gallery had been devastating, both financially and emotionally. For years, he had been rebuilding his life, carefully navigating the same art world that had betrayed him. Now, he was risking it all again for one final shot at taking down Jacob. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she walked toward it, peering through the peephole. To her surprise, it wasn't Nicholas standing on the other side. It was Daniel Hart. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't seen Daniel in years, Not since the fallout with Jacob. He looked older now, the wear of those years etched into his face, but there was still a sharpness in his eyes, a watchfulness that hadn't faded. Slowly, she opened the door. "Daniel," she whispered, unsure whether to be relieved or suspicious. "How did you find me?" Daniel gave her a small, strained smile. "I've been following the situation for a while. I figured it was only a matter of time before you came looking for me." Olivia stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for hidden threats. It was the same paranoia she remembered from when they worked together. But this time, Olivia wasn't sure if it was justified. "I didn't think you'd show up," Olivia said, closing the door behind him. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," Daniel replied, his voice low. "I've been staying out of the way for a reason. Jacob, he doesn't let people walk away easily. Especially not me." Olivia studied him, trying to read the exhaustion in his posture. There was something different about him. He seemed more fragile, as if he had been running for too long. "Why now, then? Why come to me?" Daniel hesitated for a moment before sitting down at the table, his fingers tracing the edges of the documents scattered there. "Because I heard about your plan, and I know what's in that vault." Olivia's pulse quickened. She sat across from him, trying to keep her voice steady. "You do?" Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "Jacob keeps more than just art in there. He keeps leverage, documents, contracts, blackmail material. He's been playing people for years, and he makes sure he has something on everyone, even Philip. It's how he stays in control." The weight of Daniel's words sank in. "So, that's how he's managed to stay untouchable for so long. He's been blackmailing people." "Not just blackmailing," Daniel corrected. "He's been orchestrating their downfalls, using what he knows to destroy them when it suits him. I was part of that machine for a long time, Olivia, until I wasn't." Olivia's hands clenched into fists. She had known Jacob was ruthless, but this was worse than she had imagined. "And you never tried to stop him?" Daniel's eyes flickered with something. "Guilt, perhaps. I wanted to, but I didn't have the power. Jacob had everything on me, too. If I tried to expose him, he would have buried me. So, I disappeared. Until now," Olivia said, her voice hardening. Daniel met her gaze, his expression unflinching. "Until now." There was a long pause, the rain outside pounding harder against the window as the silence stretched between them. "We're breaking into the vault tomorrow night," Olivia said finally, deciding there was no point in hiding their plans. "Nicholas and I. We're going to get the proof we need to take Jacob and Philip down." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "You'll need help. That place is locked down tight." Jacob spared no expense on security. "We have a plan," Olivia replied, though she knew Daniel's expertise would be invaluable. "But if you know something that could help us, we could use it." Daniel's eyes darkened as he weighed his options. For a moment, Olivia thought he might walk away again. But then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "There's a back entrance. It's not on any of the blueprints Jacob submitted for the building. He had it built specifically for private access. No security cameras, no guards. Just an old-fashioned lock system that only a few people know about. I can get you in." Olivia's heart raced. This was the break they needed. "Are you sure? Jacob won't see us coming?" Daniel nodded. "If you follow my lead, you'll get inside without triggering any alarms. But once you're in, you're on your own." Olivia exhaled, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. With Daniel's help, they had a real chance of getting what they needed. "We're meeting at 10 p.m. tomorrow," she said, her voice steady. "Will you be there?" Daniel hesitated for only a second before giving a curt nod. "I'll be there." As he stood to leave, Olivia felt a strange sense of gratitude mixed with unease. Daniel had been a key part of Jacob's rise, and while he had come to her now, she couldn't help but wonder what his true motivations were. Could she really trust him? Or was he still playing both sides? But as she watched him walk out into the rain, she knew there was no turning back. Whatever his reasons, Daniel Hart was part of their team now. And tomorrow night, they would confront the darkness Jacob Reed had hidden for so long. Olivia closed the door behind him, her mind swirling with the weight of what lay ahead. She pulled out her phone and sent Nicholas a quick message. "We've got an ally. Daniel is in." Nicholas's reply was almost immediate. "Good. Tomorrow, everything changes." As Olivia stared at the screen, the rain pounding harder outside, she knew he was right. Tomorrow, everything would change, for better or worse. And Jacob Reed would finally face the reckoning he had evaded for far too long. The night was darker than usual, with thick clouds smothering the moon, leaving New York in a blanket of shadow. It was a night meant for secrecy, perfect for the dangerous mission Olivia, Nicholas, and Daniel were about to undertake. As Olivia paced inside her apartment, checking her equipment for what felt like the 100th time, she couldn't shake the gnawing sense of dread that clung to her. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The blueprints of Jacob Reed's private vault had been studied, the security system analyzed, and bypass strategies mapped out. Daniel's knowledge of the secret back entrance was their ace, but even that didn't fully calm Olivia's nerves. This wasn't just about breaking into some collector's storage facility. It was about walking into the lair of a man who had destroyed lives with a smile. At exactly 9:45 p.m., Olivia grabbed her backpack, double-checking that the miniature camera and lockpicking tools were still inside. She wasn't a criminal by trade, but she had learned enough over the years about how to navigate the art world's darker corners. Tonight, she'd need every skill she had picked up along the way. Her phone buzzed. "Nicholas. I'm outside." She took a deep breath, casting one last glance around her apartment. In just a few hours, everything could be different. They could be exposed. They could fail. But they had come too far to back out now. Olivia stepped out into the cold night air, pulling her jacket tight around her. Nicholas was waiting in his black SUV at the curb, the engine idling quietly. As she approached, she saw his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard. Tense, focused. He gave her a nod as she slid into the passenger seat. "Everything ready?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Olivia nodded. "As ready as we'll ever be." "What about Daniel?" "He'll meet us at the entrance," Nicholas replied, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "He's already scoped out the area. Says the guards aren't a problem, just a rotating patrol every 20 minutes. Once we're inside, we've got about 15 minutes before anyone notices something's off." Olivia exhaled slowly, trying to steel her nerves. "And the vault itself? What are we expecting?" Nicholas hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's going to be tight. Even with Daniel's help, the vault is likely under heavy surveillance. If Jacob has anything important in there, we'll need to move fast. We can't linger." Olivia glanced out the window as they drove through the city, the familiar streets of Manhattan now feeling strangely ominous. Each block they passed brought them closer to Jacob's fortress. Her mind drifted back to the conversation she had with Daniel the night before. His cryptic warnings about what lay inside. Blackmail, stolen art, possibly even forgeries and illegal deals. But Daniel had also hinted at something else, something deeper, something he hadn't fully explained. Olivia wasn't sure whether to trust him entirely, but for now, he was their only shot at getting inside. After about 20 minutes, Nicholas turned onto a quiet side street, the SUV slowing as they approached a nondescript industrial building. To anyone passing by, it would have looked like just another abandoned warehouse in the middle of the city. But they knew better. Daniel was already there, standing in the shadows by a rusted metal door, his posture tense. He wore a simple black jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. When he saw the SUV pull up, he gave a quick nod and motioned for them to join him. Olivia climbed out of the vehicle, the cool air biting at her skin. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement, but the street was empty, too quiet, even for this part of town. Nicholas followed, his face set in a grim expression as they approached Daniel. "All clear?" Nicholas asked in a hushed tone. Daniel nodded, though his eyes darted around the alley as if expecting someone to jump out at any moment. "The patrol just passed. We've got about 15 minutes before they loop back around. This way." Without another word, Daniel led them toward the back entrance, a rusted, unmarked door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He knelt down, pulling a small toolkit from his jacket and working the lock with quick precision. After a few tense seconds, there was a soft click, and the door creaked open. "This takes us directly into the lower levels," Daniel whispered, motioning for them to follow. "The vault is 2 floors down. No cameras on this side, but once we're inside, we'll need to be quick. The main security system is upstairs, and once we're in the vault room, we've got to work fast." Olivia exchanged a glance with Nicholas. His jaw was set, eyes forward, completely focused. She knew he had everything to lose if this went wrong. His finances, his future, and perhaps even more than that. But they were in this together now, and neither of them could afford to hesitate. They stepped into the building, the cold, musty air enveloping them as Daniel quietly closed the door behind them. The corridor was dimly lit by old industrial lights that flickered occasionally, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. Daniel moved ahead, leading them deeper into the bowels of the building. The air grew heavier as they descended the narrow staircase, the walls pressing in on them. Olivia could feel her pulse quicken with every step, the weight of what they were about to do settling over her like a shroud. She clenched her fists, reminding herself why she was here. For justice, for the years Jacob had stolen from her, for the artists whose lives he had ruined. Finally, they reached the lower level. The air was thick with dampness, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance. Daniel motioned for them to stop at the end of the corridor, pointing toward a steel door at the far end. "That's the vault," he whispered. "It's biometric, fingerprint, and a passcode. I can override the system, but once we're in, the countdown starts. We'll have less than 10 minutes before the system triggers an alert." Nicholas glanced at Olivia, his eyes locking with hers. "Are you ready?" She nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. There was no time for fear now. Daniel moved to the control panel beside the door, pulling out another small device. Olivia watched as he worked quickly, bypassing the security with practiced ease. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a soft beep, the door's lock disengaged. "Go," Daniel hissed, pushing the door open just wide enough for them to slip inside. The vault was unlike anything Olivia had expected. Instead of a cold, sterile room filled with high-security cases, it was almost elegant. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with priceless pieces of art, paintings, sculptures, rare artifacts. But it wasn't the art that caught her attention. It was the documents. Stacks of papers were piled on a long wooden table in the center of the room, each one carefully labeled and organized. Olivia's eyes darted across the labels: private collections, forgery records, investor agreements. And then, she saw it. One folder in particular that sent a chill down her spine. Blackmail, Philip Reed. Nicholas moved to the table, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts as he scanned the documents. "This is it," he whispered, pulling open the folders and rifling through the papers. "This is everything. Contracts, deals, records of the forgeries. He's kept it all." Olivia felt a surge of adrenaline as she grabbed the camera from her bag, snapping photos of each page. They didn't have time to sift through everything now, but they needed to document as much as they could. 5 minutes, Daniel warned, his voice tense. "We need to move." As Olivia worked, her mind raced. This was bigger than they had imagined. Jacob's entire operation was here, laid bare in front of them. But as she flipped through the documents, something nagged at her. There was still one piece missing. The connection between Jacob and Philip, the proof that would take them both down. And then she saw it. A small, worn notebook tucked beneath one of the stacks. Olivia grabbed it, flipping it open to the first page. It was filled with handwritten notes, Jacob's handwriting. But as she skimmed through the pages, her heart stopped. These weren't just business records. They were confessions. Confessions of how Jacob had manipulated investors, framed rivals, even sabotaged entire galleries to ensure his rise to power. And in the final pages, there it was. A detailed account of his partnership with Philip, outlining their forgery scheme and the blackmail material they held over powerful figures in the art world. "We've got it," Olivia whispered, clutching the notebook tightly. "This is what we need." But just as they were about to pack everything up, the sound of a loud click echoed through the room. The door slammed shut. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as the lights flickered and a sharp, mechanical whine filled the air. Nicholas spun around, eyes wide with alarm. What the? Daniel's face went pale as he rushed to the door, pressing his ear against it. No, no, no. This wasn't supposed to happen. What is it? Olivia demanded, her pulse racing. Daniel turned, his face ashen. We triggered the failsafe. We're locked in. Olivia's blood ran cold. The whine of the locking mechanism echoed ominously through the vault as Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hand instinctively gripped the small notebook tighter, her fingers brushing over the damning confessions written by Jacob Reed. It was their key to bringing him down, and now, in a cruel twist, they were trapped in the very vault they had risked everything to infiltrate. Nicholas turned toward Daniel, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and fury. What do you mean we're locked in? His voice was tight, barely controlled. Daniel's face had drained of color. His hands fumbled over the control panel on the door, trying and failing to reverse the lockdown. There's a secondary security protocol. I didn't know about it, he muttered, his voice trembling. Jacob must have added it after I left. We must have triggered it when I bypassed the system. The whole place is in lockdown now. Olivia's stomach twisted. This was not part of the plan. In fact, it was the one scenario they hadn't accounted for, being trapped in Jacob Reed's fortress with no way out and no one to help them. How long before someone comes? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, already dreading the answer. Daniel's eyes darted toward the floor, his expression darkening. Could be minutes. Could be longer. Depends if the system alerts Jacob directly or his security team first. Nicholas swore under his breath, pacing the room, his eyes scanning for any sign of a weakness in the walls, a vent, anything. We have to find another way out. There has to be another way. Olivia tried to keep her thoughts from spiraling into panic. Her mind raced, flipping through every possible scenario, every escape route, but nothing came to mind. The vault was airtight, meticulously designed to be impenetrable, both from the outside and within. They were inside Jacob's most prized possession, his vault of secrets, and now it felt like a tomb. I didn't come this far to get trapped in here, Nicholas growled, his voice laced with determination. There has to be something we're missing. Daniel, still pale and clearly shaken, turned to face them both. There's one last option. He hesitated, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want to say it. But it's risky. If we try it and it fails, we'll have no time left. Olivia frowned, her nerves fraying as she watched him. What is it? Daniel stepped closer to the control panel, his eyes fixed on a small, recessed key slot next to the biometric scanner. There's an emergency override, he explained. A manual failsafe that Jacob never fully trusted the security system with. It's meant for situations like this, where someone might get trapped inside. If I can trigger it, we might be able to manually unlock the vault door. Nicholas's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into his tone. And why didn't you tell us about this before? Daniel didn't flinch, but kept his gaze on the panel. Because it requires Jacob's key, his personal access key. Olivia's stomach sank as she realized what Daniel was saying. So, unless we somehow have Jacob's key, we're stuck. Daniel nodded grimly. Unless one of us can replicate his key, we're stuck? Damn it. Nicholas slammed his fist into the steel wall beside him, the sharp clang reverberating through the vault. We've got what we need to destroy him, and now we're going to be sitting ducks when his team shows up. Olivia's mind raced. They had come so close to unearthing the truth and exposing Jacob for the monster he was. Now, it was slipping through their fingers. She glanced back at the documents scattered across the table, her pulse quickening as she remembered the small, worn notebook she had found. Something about it felt off. Why would Jacob leave his most sensitive documents just sitting in a vault, even one as secure as this? And then it hit her. The notebook. She quickly flipped it open again, her eyes scanning the pages, searching for something that had gnawed at her subconscious when she first saw it. As she turned the last few pages, her breath caught. There, tucked between two entries, was a thin, almost invisible slot, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Her hands shook as she reached inside, pulling out a small, plastic card. She held it up to the light, her heart racing. It was a key card, a backup key card. "Nicholas," Olivia breathed, holding it up. "I think I found it." Nicholas and Daniel both rushed over, their eyes wide as they stared at the key card in Olivia's hand. "Is that?" Nicholas began, disbelief creeping into his voice. "I think it's Jacob's backup," Olivia said, her voice trembling with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. "He must have hidden it in case he ever got locked out." Daniel's eyes narrowed in realization. "That's it. That's the key." Without another word, Olivia handed the key card to Daniel, who immediately inserted it into the panel. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, a sharp beep echoed through the vault as the override system engaged. The lights flickered briefly, and Olivia held her breath, praying that it would work. Suddenly, the door clicked, and with a soft hiss, the locking mechanism disengaged. "It worked," Daniel whispered, his voice filled with awe and relief. "We're in the clear." Nicholas didn't waste a second. He grabbed the most critical documents from the table, stuffing them into his bag while Olivia snapped more pictures. They had what they needed, enough to destroy Jacob's entire empire. But they couldn't linger. They needed to get out before Jacob or his security team arrived. "Let's go," Nicholas ordered, his voice hard. "We don't have much time." They rushed out of the vault, the adrenaline pumping through their veins as they made their way back down the narrow corridor. Daniel led them to the back exit, the same way they had come in, the cold air biting at their skin as they slipped into the shadows of the alley. As they ran through the quiet streets, Olivia's mind raced. They had done it. They had gotten the proof. But now, the real battle began. Jacob Reed was a powerful man with powerful connections, and once he realized what they had taken from him, he would stop at nothing to get it back. When they reached the SUV, Nicholas was already pulling out his phone, calling in the contacts who would help them release the information to the world. He turned to Olivia, his face stern but relieved. "We're going public with this. Tomorrow morning. Once it's out, Jacob won't be able to stop it." Olivia nodded, her pulse still racing as she slid into the car. "What about Philip?" she asked, her voice quieter. "We still haven't connected him directly to the forgery ring." Nicholas's eyes darkened. "We will. With what we've got, we can tie Jacob to the scheme, and Philip won't be far behind." This is just the beginning. As the SUV sped away from the building, Olivia leaned back in her seat, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of New York. They had risked everything tonight. Her past, Nicholas's reputation, Daniel's very life. And yet, they had succeeded. But she knew this wasn't over. Jacob Reed would come for them. He wouldn't go down without a fight. And when he did, Olivia would be ready. For now, though, she allowed herself one moment of quiet victory. Tomorrow, the world would finally see Jacob for what he truly was. The truth was coming, and this time, there was no escape. The morning sun rose over New York City, casting a golden light on the streets that had been silent witnesses to Olivia's struggle. She stood by the window of Nicholas's office, watching as the city slowly came to life. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear this time, but from the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Behind her, Nicholas sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear as he finalized the arrangements. It was happening. After all the lies, betrayals, and manipulation, Jacob Reed's empire was about to crumble. "Everything's set," Nicholas said, hanging up and looking at Olivia with a mix of excitement and tension. "The documents are with the journalists. The story will break within the hour. Once it hits the news, there's no going back." Olivia nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of the window frame. She had waited for this moment for so long. Years of hiding in the shadows, trying to rebuild her life after Jacob had stolen everything from her. Now, the truth would finally be revealed. Not just her truth, but the truth of all the artists Jacob had destroyed and the vast network of corruption he had built with his brother Philip. Nicholas stood, crossing the room to stand beside her. "How do you feel?" She exhaled, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at the skyline. "Nervous, relieved, angry." She paused, searching for the right words, but mostly ready. Ready for this to finally be over. Nicholas gave her a small, knowing smile. It's not over yet. Jacob's going to fight this. He won't go down quietly. Olivia turned to face him, her eyes sharp with determination. He can try, but we've got the truth on our side now. He can't bury this. Nicholas nodded, but Olivia could see the tension in his shoulders. He was right. Jacob Reed wasn't the type to simply disappear in the face of scandal. He had spent his life manipulating the system, using his wealth and influence to shield himself from consequences. This would be a war, and it wouldn't end until Jacob was cornered with no escape. But Olivia wasn't afraid anymore. She had already lost everything once. She had nothing left to fear. A sharp knock on the door pulled both of them from their thoughts. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as the door opened, and Daniel stepped into the room, his expression grim. He closed the door behind him, glancing around as if expecting Jacob to burst through the walls at any moment. "It's done," Daniel said, his voice low. "The media's going to pick it up soon. The forgeries, the blackmail, the stolen art, everything. I've confirmed with the contacts in the galleries. Jacob's name is going to be dirt by the end of the day." Olivia felt a rush of satisfaction. It was finally happening. The world would see Jacob Reed for what he truly was, a fraud, a manipulator, and a criminal. There would be no more galleries, no more elite circles that protected him. And with the evidence they had gathered, his brother Philip wouldn't escape either. "Good," Nicholas said, his voice tight. "But we need to be ready. Jacob's not going to sit back and let this happen." Olivia exchanged a glance with Daniel. He had been quiet since the vault heist, his face haunted by memories of his time working with Jacob. He had taken a huge risk coming back into the fold, and Olivia still wasn't sure where his loyalties truly lay. But for now, he was on their side. "Are you sure we can trust your contacts?" Olivia asked, her tone cautious. Daniel's eyes darkened as he nodded. "They want Jacob gone as much as we do. Too many people have suffered because of him. And after what we found in that vault, no one's going to defend him now." Olivia nodded, though a part of her remained wary. The stakes were too high for them to let their guard down, even for a second. Jacob had made a career out of slipping through the cracks, and they couldn't afford to underestimate him. The minutes ticked by as they waited, the silence in the room thick with tension. Olivia paced the floor, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What would Jacob do when the story broke? Would he disappear, or would he come after them? And what about Philip? They had tied him to the forgery ring, but he was even more elusive than Jacob. Would he be the one to retaliate? The sound of Nicholas's phone buzzing shattered the silence. He picked it up, his expression sharpening as he read the message. "It's out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The story's live." Olivia froze, her pulse quickening. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. She pulled out her own phone, quickly opening the news site Nicholas had mentioned. There it was, the headline splashed across the front page of every major outlet. "Art World Scandal. Jacob Reed and Philip Reed exposed in massive forgery and blackmail operation." Her hands shook as she scrolled through the article, the details laid out in brutal clarity. The forgeries, the stolen art, the blackmail used to manipulate galleries and investors. Everything they had uncovered was there, backed by the documents and photographs they had taken from the vault. Jacob Reed was finished. Nicholas exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "It's done. Now we wait." But the waiting didn't last long. Barely an hour after the story broke, Olivia's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Something told her she already knew who it was. She answered, her voice steady. "Hello?" A familiar voice, smooth and cold, cut through the line. "Olivia, you've been busy." Jacob Reed. Olivia's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had been expecting this. "It's over, Jacob. Everyone knows. You can't run from this." A low chuckle echoed through the phone. "You think a few articles are going to stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Olivia tightened her grip on the phone, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "You're finished. The galleries are cutting ties with you. The authorities are already investigating the forgeries. You can't talk your way out of this." There was a pause on the other end, the silence heavy with menace. When Jacob spoke again, His voice was ice. "You've made a mistake, Olivia. I still have friends in high places. This isn't over." But Olivia wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. "Maybe you do," she said quietly, "but we have the truth. And no matter how hard you try, you can't bury it this time." Another pause. This time, when Jacob spoke, the smugness in his voice was gone, replaced by a simmering fury. "You'll regret this." The line went dead. Olivia lowered the phone slowly, her hands shaking. Nicholas and Daniel watched her, their expressions tense. "What did he say?" Nicholas asked. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "He's not giving up, but it doesn't matter. We've already won." For a long moment, no one spoke. The gravity of what they had done settled over them, heavy and exhilarating at the same time. Jacob would fight, of course, but his empire was crumbling, and no amount of threats would save him now. Olivia turned back to the window, the city stretching out before her. The sun was rising higher, bathing New York in warm, golden light. For the first time in years, she felt free. Free from the shadow of Jacob Reed. Free from the lies and betrayals that had defined her career. She had fought back, and she had won. As she stood there, watching the city wake up, Nicholas stepped beside her. "He'll go down swinging," he said softly. "But you're right. We've won." Olivia nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of closure. There would still be battles ahead. Jacob wouldn't go quietly, and Philip would no doubt try to escape the fallout. But the truth was out now, and that was something no one could take away. They had done it, and no matter what happened next, Olivia knew she was no longer the woman Jacob had tried to destroy. She was stronger now, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. "We did it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Nicholas smiled, and for the first time in a long while, so did Olivia. And in that moment, she knew the nightmare was finally over.